everybody. My name is Raven Mayne, and I am a Laurel from the Kingdom of Vagueville. I've been painting on fabric probably over 15 years now, and I paint. I'm very blessed that I get to literally paint on fabric every day. So this class is what I found works for me. As I go through all of this class, there may be you may be able to try something different. But this is basically how I get how the instruction from start to finish. So let me start the PowerPoint. Again, this is painting on fabric. Me. Following this is supplies and paintings fabric instruction. What I use. Please do your research and practice. You're going to paint on fabric. Do a lot of practice. So this is so first you get your fabric you want to paint on. I use a lot of natural fabrics because anything else that's not stretches and will move when you paint it. So I usually paint on cotton or linen mostly, and it's usually for the banners that I paint, it's heavyweight, thick cottons or linen, and for clothes, it can be anywhere from thin to heavy. So when you're starting, you want to have a good sized table, and you want to make sure that you can get around it without anything preventing you from getting around it. I do recommend that you put something on the table, so you can, depending on the size of your whatever you're going to put, you can put down parchment paper or wax paper. The easiest one is like old shower curtain. You can put down whatever it is to protect the table. And you also have to worry about the floor. So anything that you can do to protect the floor that around you is a really good idea, because paint will get where you want it and it will get where you don't want it usually. So you can get small paint jars or containers to put your paint in. Now, the reason I do this is because I will say it in a little bit, but I put a medium in it, which will helps the paint adhere to the fabric. So that's what I mix it in. It's a 2-part paint, 1-part medium. But I usually try and do that and put them in small jars. So small paint jars are good. I'm always trying to find a better one because there's always one that doesn't seal all the way. So I use acrylic paint, which is folk art or Americana, but it's a lot of it's in the acrylic paint craft section. That's basically what I use. I use a lot, whatever I can get a hold of. The different brands, also the different colors. So that's something that you have to think about if you're wanting to paint a big piece. And there's a lot of different kind of brands that you can use. But those are the ones I use. For metallics, I use a company called Lumiere. It's by Jacquard. This has paint medium already infused in it. It's a little more than the regular little 2-ounce acrylic fabric paint, but it goes a lot farther. And again, it already has infused in it things that will make it the paint adhere to the fabric. So, and the metallics, for anybody that does paint on any level, metallics are usually the ones that have to be unique because the however they mix the metal in it. So, but it says you have to heat set it. I try to heat set as much as possible. But there are some mediums that say that you don't have to, but I get in the habit of doing it anyway. Again, the textile medium, you have to be careful which one that you buy. There are 2 kinds. One is for craft paint, and the other one is for acrylic paints that you would use for to be like oil painting. So if you're painting like on a canvas, if you've ever painted with oil paints, uh, the drying time is usually, it takes a long time to dry. So there's a medium you can add to the acrylic that will help it either dry faster or slower. So that's not the one you want. You want the one that's just regular, has no drying time on it. It's just textile medium. Right now, I can't get them in the big bottles anymore, so I regulated to a lot of buying a lot of the 2 ounce ones. I use for brushes, I use acrylic angled brushes um, because I use it similar to how you would use um, a calligraphy pen. Is because the way it's angled, you can paint really small spots, or you can use the whole brush and paint really thick lines. So that's why I use it. But there's a lot of different brushes out there. And I use acrylic because anything that has natural hair in it will usually lose the hair and usually will come up in the paint, usually. So, but that's why I usually just use the acrylics. Always have paper towels close to you for cleanup. Uh, it's always going to be, usually it's going to be unexpected when you need them, so have them within arm's reach always. Um, I use a water cup, and I usually have things like that, like things that I'm drinking and water cups, um, not just barely within reach, and that is so that I don't bump it or knock it by accident. So, but I use the water cup to put my brushes in and clean my brushes. I clean my brush with paper towel before I put it in the water, just because I don't want to add more uh, paint that doesn't need to be into the water. But I use that to clean my brushes right away, and I also leave them in there most of the time, just so that way when I'm ready to clean them there, I don't have to worry about trying to get all of the residue off. There is small weights is a really good idea. Any kind of paperweight or anything that'll hold the fabric, because sometimes as you're painting, the fabric will move on you um, unintentionally. So you want to, put a bunch of them on the fabric. You don't have to, but it's just a thing to think about to try and make sure that your whatever fabric you're working on is not going to move. Like I mentioned before about ironing, you can have iron and an iron board for heat setting. I will mention something towards the end of the class about about ironing. So it is acrylic, and you do not want to heat acrylic. So when you're ironing, you have to try and iron on the back of the fabric, not directly on the acrylic paint, because it will come off on the iron. Even sometimes even on low, which is recommended. Um, so when you're doing that, even when I do that, I have a thin piece of cotton between the fabric and the iron, just because I just want to make sure that the acrylic paint does not melt. So, and later on, I'll mention why there's other things that you can do. I use an extra fine point Sharpie to trace whatever I'm doing. I also retrace it at the end. It's something that I do when I did a lot of scrolls when I do black work. So I got in that habit of cleaning. When I do it at the end, it kind of cleans up all of the lines and parts where you might have painted over a little bit. I have not had any issues since I've been doing that. I've only had issues with pens that say they don't bleed or are specifically for fabric. They've always given me trouble, so I don't. I use the extra fine point Sharpie. If you're on tracing on dark fabric, obviously you want silver Sharpie is probably the best to be able to use that. So you picked out your fabrics. You want to wash it all hot. You don't want anything that has dyes or perfumes in it. because that, and again, as in the next part with fabric softener, you don't want to use that, or dryer sheets. All of these things chemically could get are made to adhere to the fabric. And what that means is if when you paint, the paint there'll be the fabric, then all of these dyes and the fabric softener, and then your paint, which means there's some the paint's not getting being able to actually adhere to the fabric. So um, that's why you don't want to do any of those things. Again, you want when you dry it, you want to dry it on the hottest setting. What you're trying to do is you're trying to uh, shrink everything and bring all the fibers as close together as possible, uh, so that when you're painting it, it is more like on a canvas rather than something that's looser than that, which would be any fabric that has loose weave is really hard to paint. So again, all of it will bring the fibers together. It should give you a flatter surface to work on. So after you do all that, then you just iron it, make sure that it's flat and ready to go when you're getting ready to put on your design. So there are a couple things you can do for designing. You can make a drawing of whatever you're doing, whether it's a dress or a tunic or uh, camp wall or whatever you're deciding to paint. A good idea is to try and either with a computer or just pen and pencil, try and make a rough drawing of where you want to put the items, the design that you want on there, and where you want to place them before you do it. One of the things that I do when I'm doing dresses is I will print out the item that I want to paint on the dress, and I'll print it in different sizes and pin it to the dress and kind of get an idea of where or how it'll look. The balance that you have to work with is you don't want to make your whatever you're painting too large, because as you put more and more paint on the dress or whatever you're painting, clothes you're painting on, it 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 does add weight and it will pull on the fibers. And down the road, you have a possibility of holes becoming into it if the paint's too heavy. So you don't want to paint out anything too large. On the other end of the scale, you don't want to paint anything too small, because then no one will be able to, will have to really look close to try and figure out what the item is. So you have to find that medium, that happy medium spot. I do recommend that if you're going to paint a dress, one of the ideas that I usually tell people is that you can make a dress and you can paint another small piece of fabric on the bottom, and then when you're done painting, you could sew them together. What that does is if you mess up for something as you're painting it, you just grab another piece of fabric, or as you wear it, if it gets damaged or everything, you can cut it off and you can put another piece of fabric on it. So that's a good way to just, especially when you're starting out painting on clothes. There are many ways of getting your design on a stencil. You can buy stencil material, but any kind of hard, stiff, like board or will work. In a pinch, I used a pizza box at War. I just was able to make a pretty good stencil with that and the smallest pair of scissors, but they do actually sell a material that stencils are usually made from, or you can make your own design. Or again, there's a lot of stencils out there you can use, that you can buy. Another way of getting your design is a light table. Now this is if the fabric is thin enough for you able to see through, but you can use a light table and then just move the fabric around to all the places that you want the item. Another option is using an opaque projector. So this is something I use when I'm doing banners or camp walls. I'm able to put the fabric on uh, usually a door or camp walls. I actually adhere them to a garage door. The only problem with doing that is that the fabric gravity always pulls on the fabric. So no matter how or where you hang it up, and you're trying to trace a design on it, you just have to be careful because, like I said, gravity will pull on the fabric, and sometimes it'll warp your design if you're not careful. One of the historical ways of doing it, obviously, is freehand. You could just draw it on there, trace it, and put your design there if you're got that skill. The other is a thing called prick and pounce. This was used in history for a lot of different reasons. One of them being trying to put on designs on fabric for embroidery, but you can use it for painting on fabric. And basically, you can buy a prick and pounce set, and usually those are pretty pricey. But I did mine with just um, a piece of fabric, put some chalk in it, and I did the prick part with just a thumbtack. So you can be as elegant with it as you can, as you want. So basically, what prick and pounce is you have a black and you can have usually a black and white line drawing. You put that on your fabric. Again, you're putting weights on the paper, make sure the paper doesn't and the fabric don't move. And then you take your pin and you poke little tiny holes along the line, as you can see there in the center. And after you do that, then you take the pounce or any kind of chalk type material and you lightly pounce the top of your drawing. And as soon as you feel like you've done it enough, then you take the paper off and you have a rough idea of your design. Again, there's a lot of issues with this, doing it this, but when I'm trying to put a design on fabric, I'm always trying to have a lot of things at my disposal in case, for some reason I can't do what I normally do on getting the design on the fabric. I have many options to go through, so always good to have plenty of options. So the paint application, again, you want to make sure that your fabric does not move. You want to have it's hard to do this, but you try and have your paint not too close to you. Again, like with your drinks or the water, you don't have these things too close to you, or nothing directly over the thing that you are painting, because whether you have pets or kids running around, or even if a sneeze will accidentally put paint again where you don't want it. So be really cognitive of things around you when you're painting. Try to have enough room to move, but also keep things at a good distance when you're painting. One of the things I do when I'm painting dresses is I will get a table that can accommodate the whole entire dress sprawled out, like you can see there in the picture on the right. And what I'll do is I'll trace the design and I will leave the dress where it is, and I will move my chair. So that way I can move all the way around the table and put the design down. Again, when I paint it, I'll be moving around the table. What the reason that this is a good idea is normally if you don't have a table that size, you have to trace or paint a section and then have to wait till it dries before you can move to the next section. So this helps move things along better if you have a table that you can do this on for when you're painting dresses. And you can there are two ways to do painting a dress. You can put stuff on the fabric before you cut it or after you cut it, but it all depends on the design that you're using. Most of the items that I paint, um, they're already put together. So one thing you can do is after you've painted your item, you can use a ultra matte Duraclear acrylic. You can, you don't have to, but sometimes people want to make sure that um, something is protected. So don't, if you go that route, do not use anything I suggest not using anything that's not ultra matte. Um, I made the mistake, and what happened is I painted a dress, and from a distance it had the look of embroidery, but as soon as I put the acrylic on, which said just matte, it made all of my things that look like embroidery, it made them all look like stickers. So that was my learning of that. So um, one of the good things that it does is after you paint something and the paint dries, um, if you hold it up or put a light behind it, you'll notice that there's now uh, little sections because the paint pulled all the fibers together. So now you're going to have like little holes. Now you can't see those holes. That's what I said. That's why I suggested a light. But from a distance, you're not, or even sometimes even too close up, you're not going to see the, those holes. But if you put an ultra clear mat over it, what will happen is that it will go over the paint and it will fill in all those rest of the holes. So it helps it more, it protects the paint. Um, and it also helps your whole design stick better to your fabric. Now it's not foolproof because after you wear things that are painted over time, um, they will most of the time at least chip up a little bit. The bottom left corner is uh, all the paints that I use, some of the paints that I use, and on the right and the bottom is the different kinds of uh, fabric mediums you can add to your fabric. And the one in the center there is that's the one that you don't want. You don't want that's the one with the different drying times. But jacquard textile is what I normally use for a lot of different things, but definitely for metallics. If you're making garb, you want to hang it up uh, before and after you wear it, because you want everything to relax. So if you leave it crumpled up on the floor or anywhere else, even like over a table or a chair, um, the paint will be at angles or bent at angles that you eventually have to iron out, and you don't if you can prevent ironing and washing the item, that is probably the best if you can help it. But if you have to wash it in cold water. Um, Usually I hand wash it if at all possible. Even the delicate cycle is okay for most washing machines, but still you want to you don't you want to make sure it is as light as possible. I also turn the item inside out so that way even in the when I put it in the washing machine, so that the paint is not directly on the agitator. The best thing is to let it air dry and just hang it up. But if you can't, a low heat on dryer usually works. So just be careful how long it stays in there and that it doesn't get too um, hot. And again, as I mentioned before about ironing, don't directly iron on top of the uh, acrylic paint. You want to do it on the back of the fabric. And like I mentioned before, I even have a thin piece of cotton that I put between the two, just so that way I'm getting the heat is getting to the fabric, but not too much onto the paint. Um, practice. So you want to try and get the idea of how paint gets on the fabric and how it stays on the fabric. So if you just want to paint, what I usually start people off when I'm teaching this class is um, favors are a wonderful way to practice because it's just usually on a little piece of fabric. Um, So definitely practice. The other thing is watch your paint. The paint, make sure that it's sitting on or somewhere that even if it spills, it doesn't get on your fabric. So you really have to be uh, cognizant of that. Even when you're holding uh, the paint, you have to make sure that you're holding it very secure, and even if you something happens, it doesn't the paint won't go uh, if you jerk a little bit or move too fast or whatever like that. I usually try and equate this to like paint is explosive, so you really want to just make sure that when you're putting it in a jar, wherever you put it down carefully and slowly, and you make sure that it stays in there. I just have a couple more pictures of stuff that I paint, but at this time, if you want, you can unmute yourself, or Ellen, if you want to read me some of the questions, I could try and answer some stuff. Yeah.
Have you ever tried to use house paint on fabric?
I have not, but I know it works. The Mistress Bridget, and I believe it from Maris, is the one that I talked to at 50 year, SCA 50 year, and that's what she used, a latex paint. It has to be latex so that that it does bend. Um, it has to be thin coats, but yeah, you can do that. Um, but it's just sometimes, for me, when I paint things like the banners that you see here, I need fabric paint so I can pick different colors. What I do suggest, if you're going to do a latex house paint, is always go to if you happen to be into a hardware store like Home Depot, Lowe's, or anything like that, you go into the section of the paints, and sometimes they have like small jars that people rejected that didn't like the color, and they're usually really cheap. You can usually get like a little quart or something of paint. Um, it's a roll of the dice, so you don't really know what color you're getting. But if you're going to use latex paint, you always want to at least try that first.
Frequently on some of those samples, they usually put a little dollop of the color on the lid.
Yeah, yeah. So if you get lucky, yeah, just definitely. Especially when you're starting out, you want to just see how the latex paint works before you put it on.
I have a question
Sure.
about the medium that you add to the paint. Can you tell me more about that? What
It's
does it
uh,
do again?
it's a textile medium, and basically, before they had textile medium, they suggested that you just add a little water, and the purpose of it is to keep the acrylic paint flexible and adheres to the fabric better. So you want it to soak in as much as possible. You don't really want it to soak through, but the paint medium helps it stick to the fabric and again makes it more malleable, so it has less chance of uh, cracking and flaking off.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is beautiful work.
Thank you. Yeah, I started, one of my peers had me paint a camp wall, and ever since then I just been painting. I unfortunately I paint less and less scrolls and start painting the fabric. But I really got painted, and I also like doing a lot of uh, if you can, if you can paint on it, I paint on it. So these are all these are all seat reserve mats is what I have them for. Basically, your device is on one side and the Kingdom of Baronial things on the other. And I put these where I'm in court. I put them on my chair so that people know where I'm sitting. So if I'm moving around, they know exactly where I'm going to be at. So, and I made a bunch of these for the household that I was in. And they got little ties so they can tie into a chair and stuff. This was a big thing that I did. On the left is St. George's Hall, and they have Knights of the Guard, the Knights of the Guard are on the ceiling with little wooden plats. So basically, for the household that I was part of, Knights of St. Michael, I took all of the Knights um, devices and I try to duplicate it as much as I could. And I put it on a separate piece of fabric so that way I could take it down and change it stuff and not and actually not paint it on the pavilion. So and I get to move it to a different pavilion if I want. And you can't really see it in the picture, but I tried even to make the segments.
There is a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just used like a wood grain thing that you can do for any kind of paint. And I did that, so you can't really see, but it's all looks like wood. Go ahead.
Question, do you prefer to paint garment fabric before or after the garment is cut and sewn?
It's usually depends on the design you want. Most of the time when I'm painting things, it's better to have it all put together. But there are some advantages to doing it and disadvantages to doing it prior to. The advantage is if you mess up, you can hopefully just cut a new piece out. The disadvantage is that as you piece, if you ever pattern any kind of clothes together, you know that trying to get it to fit, fit a person takes a lot of adjustments. And if you paint a section, it may not end up in the section that you wanted it in. But the other way of painting on fabric is stamping, which I don't go over in this class, but I do know that people who do stamping on fabric want to usually do it on the fabric before you even cut it. So there's pros and cons to everything, but I personally paint on the clothes when they're almost done. So when they still need hemming, is usually paint just before that part of it.
What kind of paint do you use for the outside of tents?
That I've never done, but I do know quite a few people who have done it, and they used house paint, latex house paint, and it seems to work pretty well. So if they're not 100% sure on all the ways you can do it, but that was the ways that the people that I know that have done it, that's what they used. But it's a little hard to do only because a lot of the period pavilions that people have, fortunately that they are treated sometimes with fire retardant or any kind of like water hydrophobic things. So you run into that kind of issue when you're trying to paint it, because that painting over that might not help adhere to the fabric, but you can always probably touch it up after a while. So
A statement and a question.
Mm.
I use Liquitex acrylic paint without fabric medium for banners and Pinzik wall sections, but I am not sure that this is a good idea for garb. It ends up being kind of stiff. Now, the question is, do you tape off sections for seams to create clear lines?
I do when I'm doing banners. I haven't really had to do that when I'm painting clothes. And I've been painting clothes for the last 15 years. And majority of it is still pretty good. I ran into an interesting quirk, and I'm not sure, I can never get 100% reason for it, but everybody that I've ever painted clothes for, even when I see the paint kind of chipping off, they won't let me fix it. So I'm not 100% sure. I can never redo or help anybody because they don't want me to touch it. If you came late into this class, you want to watch it again, this will be recorded. But I have taught this over in different areas. So I have it. This class is recorded in a lot of different libraries on YouTube. So if you typed in Raven Mayne and painting on fabric, a video will come up.
All right, we have another question. Let's see, actually. I know that another friend who does fabric painting uses house paint for floor and cloth walls. Okay, and I'll drop a group for that.
Yeah.
Question, I have a canvas parasol. Someone suggested I use leather paint on it. What do you suggest?
I painted parasols, and I use all the acrylic paints that I have. But I'm not advert to experimenting. So if you could find a piece to practice on, to see how it lasts before you do it, that'd be the best way. But I'm not. I have painted. Actually, I have painted leather, and I've used acrylic paints. So most of these paints have similar chemical makeup. So I've never done that painted with anything other than acrylic paints. But again, if you want to try it to see how it works. So also when I do paint on parasols, for some of them I do use the clear coat because it does protect. If you want to actually use it as to protect you from light rain. I've done that before.
Also, how would I clean that before washing, since I can't just put it in the washer?
The parasol or clothes?
I take that to be the parasol.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah. You just have to be really careful. So obviously, you just have most of the things that you paint, you want to try and keep to the point where you can just do everything without washing it. So washing it is where you have no other choice than you have to wash it. It either got stained or the dirt will not come out any other way. But yeah, just majority of the stuff that I paint on fabric, like I mentioned before, should be hand washed because you want to have as much control of it as possible and uh, not treat it too roughly because you want to make sure that you're being delicate with the fabric. Make sure that the paint stays where it's at. You may still have to do touch-ups now and again. Like I said, Mistress Bridget, who wonderfully painted dresses, I believe she was painting them in the 70s. And I have seen them
80s and 90s.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mistress Bridget of Mercia did most of her painting in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, the things that I have seen, they still look great. I mean, they had touch-ups, but they're still able to be worn. So, but yeah,
I've seen many of her pieces that are still just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and she goes on. She's on the other side of not worrying about how much she put on the fabric because a lot of her bunch of her dresses have lots of paint on it. So it looks beautiful the way it is. So that was the first time I actually seen that much paint on fabric. But again, it still looks amazing. So
For your shading, are you doing layering as in solid color first, then a wash for the shading? If you do this method, do you wait for the underpaint to dry first?
yes. I do a wide variety of things, and it all depends. Sometimes it's shading is what I'm known for. So I did a lot of shading and illumination, and I do shading in my painting. Now it's not something that you have to do. It's just something that I do. And I like the depth that it creates. But there are the ones that I initially learned painting from didn't use any shading whatsoever. So I have laid a base coat down first, and then went back and with some more of the paint, I tried to do some shading. Sometimes if I'm doing a lot of shading in a small area, sometimes I will actually shade as I go. So that's when I use the different technique of actually, as I'm painting it, I'm also working on those areas to shade it. And also after I'm done, I usually have to go back because it looks great when the paint and everything's wet, but as soon as it dries, you'll see that it dried and it has a line now. So now I go back and I blend all those lines back in. So and fix any mistakes.
I don't have any more questions at the moment, but I did drop the link to the Facebook group for the printed textiles. Mistress Bridget's, Countess Bridget's group is in the chat now.
Yeah, I always usually get this wrong, but I know a Countess Bridget and a Mistress Bridget, and I think her a Grace Bridget. And one lives in Washington, one lives in California, and the other one lives, I believe, in Florida. And they all paint on fabric, which I find kind of interesting. But yeah, they've all been doing it on painting on fabric. The thing that I do want to mention too is that for a good amount of time, I don't know how long, but a good amount of time, maybe over a decade, painting on fabric um, was not looked on very favorable. Be only for whatever reason, but when you do it on certain fabrics, it will look like embroidery. Some look like it's trim. There's no really a lot of extent pieces from history for clothes. There are painted banners or barding for animals. There's still those kind of painted items are still there. But we do have a lot of written documentation of people that used to paint fabric, and usually it was for two different reasons. One was for plays that they put on, because obviously most of the time when you're doing a play, you can't afford gems. So a lot of they would make these really fancy clothes, but they would paint all of the gems on them or paint the designs to make them look really fancy. And they also painted clothes I kind of related to something sometimes like what you do for an event like football or something. For like a lot of the uh, parties and that they used to have late at night on the streets. Sometimes people would paint on their clothes, um, but since most of the paint that they used didn't always adhere to the fabric, and some of it had acidic and the caustic materials in it, they knew that a lot of these clothes were not going to last. So they usually did it, especially for an event or for a specific amount of time, and then and they obviously didn't do it on any great good fabric. Sometimes they usually try to piece together discarded fabric. They didn't usually paint like I said, new fabric. It was always trying to get the last use out of whatever it is before it's thrown away or used for something else.
When painting words, is there a way not to get the paint to seep through the other side? I wanted to do a double-sided banner with words. One side looked good, but showed through the other. Any ideas?
The thing about doing that is you want what I mentioned before is to have a heavier weight fabric. The thicker and the heavier weight fabric, there is less chance of it going through. Also, if your paint is too liquidy, it'll also seep through. So you really want to try and prevent that from happening. One thing I did do that I don't have pictures of is I painted camp walls and I used drop cloth, because if you're going to do camp walls the fabric for a drop cloth is like minimal compared to if I actually bought fabric. But when I painted those, the benefit was that you could actually see it from both sides, um, which I thought was kind of cool. So, but yeah, you just want to use heavy amount of fabric and a thicker paint, not too thick because you don't want to make it, a thick. You want to still make a thin uh, layer of paint, but yeah, those are the two things that should be able to help you when you're painting.
Do you combine block and hand? I'm assuming block
Sometimes,
printing and hand printing.
yeah, sometimes, but not really. But you can, because there's a lot of times we'll use block printing, and then we'll go back over and try and for the parts that the paint didn't actually go where we needed it, we kind of use to fix stuff up. Thank you for coming to the class. I really appreciate it.